America is closer to authoritarianism than most people realize. We elected a vice president who has publicly endorsed the ideas of Curtis Yarvin.
There's this guy, Curtis Yarvin,
a writer and startup guy backed by Peter Thiel, who thinks democracy should be replaced with a corporate monarchy that works with the efficiency of a Silicon Valley tech company.
If Americans want to change their government, they're going to have to get over the dictator phobia.
But the real threat to democracy isn't coming from authoritarians. It's that the framers' constitutional design that was supposed to prevent tyranny is actually creating the exact conditions for people to want it. If you're concerned about what's going on and want some ideas about how to short-circuit this insane trend, please watch this video to the end. I'm going to tell you one story about what I witnessed firsthand in my career as a government administrator. I'm a lawyer who spent nearly 20 years in government and philanthropy, managing $300 million a year in federal housing funds. And you know what? Yarvin isn't wrong about government being inefficient, and we're making a mistake if we don't acknowledge that and start to truly think about how we could correct it. Because the solutions are not obvious, they're not sexy, and they're simply not being offered to us. So in 2021, I helped manage the largest one-time ever federal homelessness aid drop in Seattle. But homelessness there actually got worse. It wasn't because we couldn't put the money to work. Seattle was actually one of the first regions to get the money into the hands of people who needed it. It wasn't because we used the wrong model. We used housing first, the same highly touted approach Finland used to eliminate homelessness. So why did it fail? Well, to understand that, you need to know something that will shock you, something that most Americans have never seen. Just how much government we actually have in this country. Now, I'm not here to tell you we need to tear down government or cut social programs. The problem isn't too much government or too little. It's the way it's organized that creates chaos and interferes with our ability to hold politicians accountable and really solve our problems. For a country founded on a distrust of government, we've utterly surrounded ourselves with it. And when I show you these numbers, you're going to understand why it feels like nothing ever gets done. You see, when we bring up government, most people just think of the federal government. Nearly 500 agencies, millions of employees, trillions of dollars. But here's what nobody ever talks about. We have over 91,000 units of state and local government in this country. And here's where it gets crazy. That's 50 states, over 3,000 counties, over 12,000 school districts, over 30,000 cities, towns, and over 38,000 special purpose districts. It's so many units, we need a separate census just to count them all. And when you add their money together, minus transfers they get from the federal government, this is the true scale of what it takes to fund government in the US. And all these units tax and regulate just the way the federal government does. And you need to think about each of them like independent power centers. But that's not all. In the US, we also rely heavily on the private charitable sector to help us provide for the common good. And each of them have their own power centers with different boards, funders, and masters. Now you might be getting some idea why solving homelessness in Seattle was going to be impossible. We're not dealing with just one government. We were in one county alone trying to coordinate over 130 of these independent power centers. We had one county, 3 housing authorities, 33 cities, nearly 100 nonprofits, foundations, and even more. I call this civic sprawl, when you have so many different players, funding systems, and regulations that solving a problem becomes much less about finding the right solution and much more about managing complexity. Because do you think all these independent micro power centers spontaneously align with each other to solve problems? Not so much. And that's the hidden reason nobody ever talks about that government seems so inefficient. We focus almost all of our energy on the federal government, to the almost complete exclusion of the state and local government role. And in the US, they hold a lot of power. But before we can think about how to fix it, we need to understand it. So let's put Seattle back under the microscope. Now, at a very simple level, government has 2 main tools. It spends and it regulates. And on the spending side, in Seattle, we had hundreds of millions of dollars to spend, which were both federal and also huge local pots of money set aside for homelessness. Now, it takes an almost Herculean effort to get all these mini centers of power onto the same page about how to spend those funds, but we did. And this was on the Housing First approach that put federally funded long-term emergency housing vouchers into the hands of homeless people so that they could rent apartments and get supportive services from all those bazillion agencies to help keep them stable. And why didn't it work? 2 reasons. Even with all that federal and local money, it was only enough to provide housing vouchers for 10% of the homeless population. And how could the problem ever get that bad? Well, that came from a lack of policy alignment from over on the other side of what government does, which is regulate. There is plenty of research that shows us homelessness is directly correlated with housing prices rising. And all these cities in the Seattle area over the last 20 years created regulatory environments that made it so hard for developers to build that as our population has grown, we generated so little housing that it completely crushed the lower end of the market, forcing people into desperate situations. Think about it like this. King County, where this was taking place, has 33 cities in it. Housing prices are regional. People commute across city lines all the time. Homelessness is regional. People move between the cities. And housing regulation is hyper-local. Each city controls its own zoning, they have their own planning and review boards, and also local council members who are super sensitive about people coming into their offices to yell at them because they don't want more density being added to their quiet communities. And the result of this is that every city can NIMBY their way out of building housing while pointing to their neighbors to take care of it. No one has to take responsibility for regional housing supply, but everybody gets to look like they're taking action on homelessness by participating in a regional homelessness authority and throwing some money into it. It's gotten so bad here that the state has tried to basically take away the power from local jurisdictions on this issue, but all of it is too little and way too late. To prevent this situation, you really would have needed a time machine. And in America, there's just no mechanism to force all of these jurisdictions and layers of government at the federal, state, and local level to align all of their policy tools in the toolkit, both spending and regulation, in a way that makes sense to solve or ideally prevent a very clear problem. But here's the kicker. The framers of the Constitution designed it that way, on purpose, to prevent tyranny. You can read in Federalist 10 how James Madison thought that dividing up power in many little slices through checks and balances you're familiar with, but also slicing and dicing it between federal and state and local governments, was going to keep power from concentrating too much in one place. You see, Madison believed that in a large republic with many diverse factions, no single faction would be able to form a majority to dominate government. Instead, the different factions would have to negotiate and compromise with each other to get anything done. So Madison's idea of diffusing power is great if your objective is to prevent the concentration of power. But when we have to solve actual modern regional problems, and you need all of the spending and regulatory power to align at all levels and in the right geographic focus, it is extraordinarily rare that you can get all of those independent power centers on the same page. We've optimized for gridlock, not governance. So the effect this is having now is that most people can feel that taxes are being taken away from them. They can look outside their window in downtown Seattle and see this very obvious and open problem with rampant homelessness. And the natural result you get is intense frustration.
They promised us as a community that we wouldn't have to continue with this.
And this is the reason why many people are attracted to strong leader solutions like the ones that are being espoused by Curtis Yarvin and the Trump administration.
Very muscular, very aggressive.
Madison's anti-tyranny design has made democratic problem-solving nearly impossible, creating the very conditions that make authoritarianism strangely appealing to some people. And when the main policy tools, spending and regulation, are divided across so many different hands, they can operate without alignment, without accountability, and without solving problems. But does it have to be like this? Actually, one democracy figured it out. Finland eliminated homelessness using the exact same model we used in Seattle. So why did it work there and not here? Well, you can watch all these great videos about it. But what people miss in that story is that it isn't just about using the housing first model. It's because their government is a perfect vehicle for vertically integrated policy deployment. You see, Finland's parliament endorsed housing as a fundamental right in 2007 and made housing first national policy in 2008. And they had a way simpler structure of government that enabled them to implement it. This is because Finland is a unitary government as opposed to a highly complicated federal one like the US. They have one national government and about 300 municipalities that do not operate like independent power centers. They operate like agents of the national government. Parliament can pass laws that apply uniformly across the country. And get this, they completely eliminated their provinces entirely in 2010. Can you imagine such a thing here? So the national government provided money and then required municipalities to fund housing first services. And here's what's really wild. They actually have a national land use law that ensured that municipalities could actually build the housing. So both spending power and regulatory power pointed in the same direction, something that's truly impossible in the United States, unless everybody agrees. And yeah, that might feel a little more authoritarian to our taste, but Finland is still a democratic country. They just cut out all of the civic sprawl. Now, Finland, of course, is a very different country than the United States, with a very different history and a much smaller population. But Finland still proves you can have efficient and effective government and democracy at the same time. But in America, we're moving in the opposite direction. Madison's anti-tyranny design is creating the perfect conditions for tyranny because people are so frustrated they can't get accountability that they're willing to elect leaders who would be perfectly happy to eliminate all of those pesky checks and balances. So we're going to have to address what's going wrong with our design, because at its core, this is a signal-to-noise problem. Our design and the civic sprawl it has produced creates a static-filled communication system that interrupts both effective representation and accountability. You have the people who want problems solved, the money, aka their tax dollars, the spenders, 91,000 plus government units, and all this static between them. The signal should be clear: who's responsible and how well they're doing. But instead, civic sprawl, aka all these overlapping agencies, competing jurisdictions, plus all the political theater we have, drowns out the real information. And when you have all these layers talking at once with no clear accountability, the result is noise, and no one to hold responsible when things fail. Madison assumed accountability would be simple. Citizens would know who represented them and could vote them out. He and Washington even insisted on keeping representation ratios low at the federal level so that all of this stayed clear, which you'll know if you watch my video on that topic. But they never could have imagined government growing this big and confounding, especially at the state and local levels. That clarity about who's responsible for what, it's vanished. And here's what civic sprawl does to us. First, it creates policy incoherence. Federal and local governments spend millions treating homelessness while local zoning keeps creating it. No one reconciles the contradictions. Second, it confuses accountability. When housing is unaffordable, who do you vote out? The mayor? The county commissioner? The zoning board? Politicians dodge blame and pass the buck. And third, it prevents real representation. Your voice gets lost in a maze of agencies and jurisdictions. The people making decisions about your life are invisible and unaccountable. Now, if we really attack civic sprawl and right-sized government, which I will be talking about in future videos, would it fix everything? Of course not. It seems so obvious to me that I don't even say it. Campaign finance reform is a necessary precondition to changing anything. Everybody knows elections are bought and paid for in this country. Politicians use scare tactics because they work, and moneyed interests have gotten winning your vote down to a science. Plus, winner-take-all elections mean it's incredibly difficult to break out of the existing two-party power structure, meaning it's very hard to bring in truly new actors and ideas. But what nobody ever talks about is that even if we had perfect campaign finance reform and other kinds of elections reforms tomorrow, we'd still have this structural problem in the form of civic sprawl that truly interferes with accountability and representation. And this inability for our system to make government efficient and effective is one of the reasons people are attracted to Curtis Yarvin and his strong leader solutions. When you can't figure out who to hold accountable, when your voice is lost in a maze of agencies, autocracy starts to sound appealing because at least you know who's in charge and might be able to get something done. Now, I don't have all the answers, folks, but I know we can't solve a problem we don't understand. And right now, most Americans don't understand how our government's design structure has contributed to what ails us. Now, you might be wondering, if our system is this fragmented and inefficient, what does good government actually look like? Well, there's a foundational framework that answers just that question. One that completely sidesteps left-right politics and focuses on the actual ingredients societies need to thrive, based on a study of history. I break that down in my next video, and I want to start a conversation with you about what resonates, because we may only have a few more election cycles before this whole system breaks. So hit like and subscribe and offer your comments down below, and I'll see you in the next video.